different way, but proof perhaps of the idea of contagion, that what has happened in other parts of the Arab world does move to other countries, and it moves quickly, and it's the same level of passion and anger amongst the people.
Yes, I think that's right. And what the Egyptian example showed was that once you take away that fear and then you inject the belief into the people that they can actually enact change, then there's no turning back. And I think that's what we're seeing in Libya, and people feel empowered by the examples of Tunisia and of Egypt, that in fact things can happen. You just need to persevere. So a lot of people are watching their screens now thinking, well, this is very difficult scenes, very unnerving scenes, but they could, in fact, they could overthrow Muammar Gaddafi through their sheer will and persistence, and that is something that the Tunisian and Egyptian examples really instilled in this region, this belief that change can come through popular uprisings.
That's Shireen Tadros, our correspondent in Cairo. Just a nice bit of perspective there as well, because so much of what we see in Libya we obviously compare to what we saw in Egypt just a few weeks ago. As Shireen points out, it is a different dynamic, but the same level of feeling is there, and the desire for change is obviously there as well. These pictures we're seeing, these are from Benghazi, I think, earlier in the day. That picture tells a story, doesn't it? The level of feeling against Muammar Gaddafi, who, must remember, we have not seen. We've seen pictures of him on state television, but there's no indication of when those were actually filmed. The rumours started flying today that he had fled to Venezuela. That was quickly denied by the Libyan foreign minister, deputy foreign minister, and then by the Venezuelans themselves. That one originally, I should point out, came from the British Foreign Minister William Hague, who said he had information that Muammar Gaddafi had moved on to Venezuela. Wherever he is, his country is burning, and there is so much anger against him from within. And I'm going to talk to Scott Heidler now, bring him in. He's at the United Nations in New York to talk through, Scott, what we've heard from the Libyan delegation there. I interviewed the deputy ambassador not long ago, who completely distanced himself from this regime and said Colonel Gaddafi should quit.
Exactly. He asked for him to quit, but then he also went in. I asked him a little bit after he had that interview with you. I asked him, so what really is the situation? And he's like, I work for the people. I don't work for Gaddafi. He said he never had spoken with them, so he is keeping his job. He has not resigned, and he said that Gaddafi should step down. That was one of 4 things he asked for. The second is that he feels as though the International Criminal Court in The Hague should take up cases of crimes against humanity based on what's happened over the last couple of days against these protesters in the nation of Libya. He's also said that the international community should impose a no-fly zone over Libya, and that's obviously because of these reports and witnesses saying that the Libyan Air Force has been bombing the protesters from fighter jets. And then lastly, he said that there should be a corridor for medical supplies to get into Benghazi. Now, that was the epicenter of what we've been seeing unfold over the last day, hours of these protesters being shot at with live fire by the military and being bombed by the Air Force. He said, the deputy ambassador, Libyan deputy ambassador to the United Nations, a corridor for medical supplies should be opened into Benghazi to help those who've been hurt, injured in these this violent attacks.
Something else interesting, Scott, which you mentioned before, I'd like you just to expand on it for viewers who've just joined us, is Ban Ki-moon, who seems none of us can get through to Libya at the moment, but he can.
Yeah, we got, it sounds a bit trite, but it's a holiday here in the United States, and the United Nations headquarters is shut as a result of that. So it's kind of odd to get any kind of communication during a holiday period, but obviously this is a big event. So Ban Ki-moon's press department issued this statement. They're not available for comment, but they did issue this statement several hours ago that Ban Ki-moon, the Secretary General of the United Nations, spoke with Colonel Gaddafi earlier today, and they said it was an extensive conversation and that the Secretary General asked for an immediate halt to the violent repression of these demonstrations going on across the nation of Libya. Now, again, obviously there wasn't much of what response from this phone call from Gaddafi's part. This was just from the Secretary General's spokesman, but it was pretty strongly worded. I'd say even definitely more strongly worded than the previous communique we see coming out from the United Nations Communications Office about what we've been seeing in different countries over the last couple of weeks. This was the strongest words that we heard from that office.
Yeah, wouldn't you just love to know what was in that conversation? Scott Heidler at United Nations in New York. Thank you for that. Now, let's go to Barbara Serra. She's in London. More reaction from across Europe on what's going on in Libya. Hi, Barbara.
Kamal, thank you for that. Yes, loads of reaction coming out of Europe. Of course, all the countries in Europe quite worried about what's going on just across the Mediterranean. But I think the most intriguing comments have come from the British foreign minister, who said that he had information that Muammar Gaddafi had already left Libya for Venezuela. Well, Rory Challens is at the British Foreign and Commonwealth Office in central London. Rory, tell us a little bit more about what's being said at the Foreign Office.
Yeah, well, intriguing is exactly the right words, Barbara. No, those comments from William Hague really stoking the speculation about where exactly Muammar Gaddafi is and where he may be headed. Now, it's interesting that after he made those comments about possibly Muammar Gaddafi being on his way to Venezuela, the Venezuelan government quickly squashed those and said that there was absolutely no information that they had that he was on his way to their country. So we'll wait and see what happens with that one. But earlier in the day, William Hague making some very, very strong statements about what is going on in Libya at the moment, calling the activities there deplorable and unacceptable. And the UK Foreign Office summons the ambassador, the Libyan ambassador in the UK, to this office where I am here, and essentially gave him a bit of a dressing down. And we can hear the sort of language that is being used by the UK government addressing Libya in what William Hague had to say earlier on today.
You asked me earlier on about whether Colonel Gaddafi is in Venezuela. I have no information that says he is, although I've seen some information that suggests he is on his way there at the moment.
Now, the British government wants certain things from the Libyan government. It wants the Libyan government to stop the violence that's going on there immediately. It also wants an inquest into what is happening and all the killings that have happened there over the last few days. And it also wants a commitment from the Libyan government towards some sort of political and economic reform. If it doesn't get that, it says, then it will be, the international community will be holding Libya and its government to account for all the things that are happening there.
It's very interesting there about the international community, because, of course, it had sort of welcomed Libya back into the fold just a few years ago. Remind us of the history between the UK and Libya, because, of course, up until not too long ago, relations were incredibly strained.
Yeah, well, true. And in recent years, the relationship between the UK and Libya had been warming, and the UK had really gone out on a bit of a diplomatic and international limb in welcoming Libya back into the international fold. If you remember back to about 2007, what was called the deal in the desert between the then Prime Minister Tony Blair, who went to Libya and met Muammar Gaddafi, that was viewed very, very controversially, both on this side of the Atlantic and particularly in America. It was seen in America that this was an oil deal, that the UK government was cozying up to Muammar Gaddafi so that it could let BP into Libya to make lots of money, essentially. And America was always very suspicious about why the Scottish Justice Minister released the Lockerbie